Welcome to Reimagine and to our panel discussion, which we're calling Empty Pockets to Full Hearts, a conversation about money. We've got some very special guests today, Cameron Huddleston, Julian and Kirsten Saunders, and Jason Vitug. My name is Andrew Engel. I'm senior programmer at Reimagine. My pronouns are he, him. I'm a white cisgender male. I've got glasses, a bright orange wall in the back, and I've got my flannel shirt on, checked, because it's really cold in New York City. This month, we are presenting the series Grief, Growth, and Money. And this is our first program kicking off the series. The next 2 Wednesdays, we'll be exploring how to transform financial troubles and traumas into new pathways. The one that we have next week on the 18th is a table talk, which is our series by and for underrepresented communities, but everyone is invited to listen and learn. We've got 3 more fantastic money experts who, and I hope you will join us for next week as well. And then finally, rounding out the series, we've got something a bit more interactive. We've invited Puzzlekind and Jolene Godfrey to do this event that combines the art of conversation with the art of digital puzzle assembly. And it's going to be a lot of fun because money is indeed a puzzle to solve. As some of you may know at Reimagine, we have been leaning into the process and philosophy of post-traumatic growth. PTG is evidence-based psychological research that allows us to recognize opportunity and experiencing change when we're struggling with grief, loss, and trauma. The kinds of growth that can occur include an increase in personal strength, optimism, more meaningful relationships, a deeper appreciation of life, and heightened spirituality and purpose. And there are several pathways to experience these changes, such as telling your story, which is what our esteemed guests will do for you today. And perhaps all of you have some stories to share, and I would encourage you to use the chat to add your reflections. The concept of PTG, post-traumatic growth, isn't exclusive to Western science. The late Zen Buddhist monk and peace activist Thich Nhat Hanh has a very simple expression that is another way of describing PTG. No mud, no lotus. So struggle is essential for any kind of development. Our 3 guests are all authors and extremely knowledgeable about money, and they acknowledge how hard it is to talk about it, particularly with family. Jason Vitug, Julian and Kirsten Saunders, and Cameron Huddleston are going to share their experiences with these hard conversations. Cameron has graciously agreed to serve as our moderator. These 4 will be in dialogue for about 40 minutes, and then we'll open this up for Q&A. And you can find more detailed bios in today's event listing. And I can post that and post links about our guests in our chat. One note about Zoom is that there is the CC button at the bottom of your screen, and you can click on that and you will get a live transcript. Also, you can save the chat by clicking on the 3 dots in the chat box. And feel free to send me a note during this event. If you're having any technical problems, I can try to help you. The majority of us are Zooming in from the United States, also known as Turtle Island by Native Americans and their allies. I'm in Lenapehoking, where a large city called New York is located on occupied land. Wherever you are, I ask you to join me in acknowledging Indigenous communities in North America, their elders, both past, present, as well as future generations. I'm stating this because it's a step to continue the process of dismantling the ongoing legacies of settler colonialism and white supremacy. But there's so much more to consider beyond this land acknowledgement. So I'm interested in knowing where you are. I will put this in the chat after I'm done speaking, but there's this wonderful website called native-land.ca, and you can check it out to learn about the locations of Indigenous people, past, present, and future. Okay. Finally, it's my pleasure to hand this over to Cameron, Jason, and Kirsten, and Julian.
Thanks, Andy. As Andy said, I am Cameron Huddleston, and I'm going to be moderating this discussion today. Julian, Kirsten, and Jason and I all come from very different backgrounds, both culturally and financially. Yet our passion for educating people about money brought us all together. In fact, we met at a conference called FinCon. We also have another thing in common. Jason, Julian, and I have all had to step into the role of being caregivers for a parent. So what we're going to do is go around the virtual round table to introduce ourselves. I'm going to start and share a little bit about my background, and then I'll hand it over to Jason and then Julian and Kirsten to share about their backgrounds. I am the author of a book called Mom and Dad, We Need to Talk: How to Have Essential Conversations with Your Parents About Their Finances. I've been a personal finance journalist for more than 20 years. I am currently the director of a company called Careful, which is the first service that was built specifically to protect the finances of aging adults. I grew up in the South in, I guess, what would be considered an upper income household. Not rich, but upper middle class. And my dad was an attorney. My mother stayed at home and took care of my sister and me. And money was not discussed in our house. Not at all. In fact, my dad always told us that, money, you don't talk about money. It's impolite. You don't ask people about their salary. You don't ask people how much they paid for things. It was definitely a taboo topic. Maybe this had to do with the generation that my parents came from. They were part of the silent generation and truly were silent on the topic of money. Maybe it even had a little bit to do with their financial status. I don't know. I haven't had a lot of conversations with people about this, but it seems maybe because they were also raised in kind of upper middle class households that, it was considered impolite in their households to discuss money. And so this, because I wasn't learning about money, because they weren't teaching me about money, I had to figure things out on my own. And that was detrimental. And looking back now, I can see that there were a lot of toxic money behaviors in my household. My father, I mentioned, worked. My mom stayed at home. My mom had no income of her own. She relied on my dad for support. He would write her checks, give my mother checks to buy groceries and things for us. And, now as an adult, I can see how that really shaped me, because I knew that I never wanted to be in a situation like that. I never wanted to have to rely on a man or anyone else to support me financially. I also saw things like my dad's desire to keep up with the Joneses and how status was important to him. And that is something that stuck with me. And it's something I've had to struggle to overcome. These money stories, our money stories, are greatly shaped by what we experience as children. And so, I think I do a much better job than my dad, than, trying to keep up with the Joneses. But like I said, it's something that I'm aware of. And it's something that I struggle with because I saw it growing up and it was so ingrained in me. And I'm not, I feel very fortunate that I grew up in the household that I did, with the resources that we had that gave me the ability to go to college. And I'm incredibly grateful for that. It gave me things and resources that a lot of people don't have. And I acknowledge that entirely. But because my parents didn't talk about money, it, like I said, I didn't learn how to manage money well. When I got out of college, I racked up debt, had no idea how to pay it off. Um, my father actually passed away at the age of 61 in a second marriage without a will. He should have known better. He was an attorney. Of course, when you lose a family member and they don't have a will, that can lead to some really complicated situations with other family members. But really, one of the biggest issues arose when I was 35 years old. And my mother, who was single because she had been divorced from my father and she was living on her own, she was diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease. I had not had detailed conversations with her about her finances. But because at that point I was already a financial journalist and had learned a lot about money, managing money at that point, I knew that I was going to have to get involved with my mom's finances right away. We had to scramble to meet with an attorney to get legal documents drafted so I would have the legal right to make financial decisions for her. But I had to play detective to figure out the details of her finances as she was forgetting them. And that could have been avoided if we had simply had open, honest conversations about her finances before there was an emergency that forced me to get involved with her finances. For the first 4 years after her diagnosis, I was her primary caregiver, providing both hands on care and help with her finances. And then it got to the point where I could no longer provide her the care that she needed on my own because I had young children, I had a full time job, and her care needs were just too great for me alone to provide that care. And so made the very difficult decision to move her into a memory care facility where she was for 8 years. And I want to point out, this is very important, that even if you are financially secure, that doesn't prevent bad things from happening. My father passed away, like I said, without a will. My mother, who was financially secure and very fortunate to inherit some wealth from her parents, developed Alzheimer's. That wealth that she inherited, she was smart about it. She didn't blow that money. That money helped pay for her care. And because my family, my husband and I are relatively financially secure, the strain of being a caregiver for my mother didn't impact our finances greatly. It certainly impacted them, but not to the extent that we were struggling financially. Um, 2 years ago today, I got the call when my mother was in her memory care facility. She, at that point, was in the late stage of Alzheimer's disease. She also had cancer and was not receiving treatment because it was honestly past the point for her to receive treatment, especially with her Alzheimer's. But I got a call on January 11th that she had contracted COVID and she was not allowed to quarantine in her facility. Hospice, she was already receiving hospice care, would not accept her in her facility because she had tested positive for COVID. And so I brought my mother to my house, not just to quarantine, but to die. And I knew she was dying already because of the cancer, because of the Alzheimer's. She had not been eating or drinking much for at least a week before. And to be honest, it was the most difficult and traumatic experience of my life. That final week of my mother's life, watching her, watching her slowly pass away, and at the same time being terrified that I might contract COVID. I went in there every time to check on her and to administer morphine with the full suit of, a mask and a face shield and gloves and a plastic gown to keep myself safe. My family was quarantined in another part of our house. And to be honest, I'm still struggling with the trauma from that experience. But again, looking back, being the fact that she was financially secure and could afford wonderful care for 8 years, the fact that I was financially secure and able to take time off after her death to grieve, that was a wonderful thing. You know, doing well financially doesn't solve all your problems. It doesn't prevent you from having problems, but it makes those emergency situations easier to handle. And that's why I think it is so important to talk about money and to have open, honest family conversations about money. So I want to pass this over now to Jason to share your background. And then, Jason, you can pass it on to Julian and Kirsten.
Thank you so much, Cameron. I do want to acknowledge that although we know at the end, we all end up at the same place. It's never easy, and it's never easy for those left behind dealing with the trauma. So I do want to acknowledge that, and I want to welcome everyone. I am excited to be here to talk about a very difficult topic, and that might be the juxtaposition of all the different types of emotions that we feel when we talk about money, when we talk about where we start off from. And so I'm Jason Vitug. I'm currently in Florida. I grew up in Jersey, and my story starts with the fact that I did grow up in an immigrant household. I am a Spanish Filipino mixed household, and we didn't talk about money. My parents made sure that we took care of the food, the housing, the clothing, and the medicine, but we didn't have the luxuries. And I didn't know growing up that I was missing out because I wasn't worried about food on the table. I wasn't worried about housing. But certainly I saw my friends with the luxury goods. I saw my friends going out on vacation, things that we weren't doing. And I didn't know up until years later, leaving the household, how much of that experience has formed my relationship with money. They were, in effect, some types of trauma. And one of the things that I like to share with folks is how my conversation with my folks started about money was when I was the age of 17. So like many people, we're told that there is a path to success and happiness and professional achievements, which is graduate high school, go to college, get a job, get a car, and one day you'll be happy. And that's also the immigrant story. Just work really hard, get the education, get the job, and things will all work out. Well, I thought I was in that path. And at 17, after being great in high school, playing sports, what have you, A's and community service, my parents sat me down and said, we can't afford to send you to school. So my parents worked really hard. They made enough to pretty much disqualify me for financial aid, but didn't have the financial resources to send their fourth child to college. So when my friends were going out their first year to their dream school, I found myself working at Newark Airport, cleaning toilets, serving drinks, and trying to save up enough money to be able to afford my first year of school. And to share with all of you, I was so embarrassed about our financial situation and the fact that I thought I had it all figured out. And then having this revelation that I lied to my friends and said, oh yeah, I'm going to college. I'm going to college. Everything is set. But lo and behold, when they were leaving and they saw that I wasn't packing up, and I finally admitted that we can't afford to send me to school, and all the hard work that I've done through high school, for me at that time, didn't feel like it meant anything. And so with that said, having my first paycheck was kind of one of those big aha moments. Like, I worked hard, I make money, but since I didn't have the financial conversations with my folks, and since I did not have the financial education at school, I didn't necessarily know what to do with that paycheck. So I recall running around the corner, opening up my bank account so I can get a debit card, because that's what adults do, right? Debit card. And what do you think someone who's not financially educated does with a debit card? Swipe, swipe, swipe. And I paid more in non-sufficient fund fees than I had in a savings account. And when I attended college at Rutgers University, there's someone that looked like a college student handing out Frisbees. And I'm like, I want a Frisbee. Well, they said sign in the dotted line. And a couple of weeks later, I get a credit card in the mail. And I used that $500 limit credit card to supplement the income that I wasn't making in order to kind of live this lavish lifestyle I couldn't afford in college. And by the time I graduated college, that $500 credit card turned to a $5,000 debt. And I don't remember what I paid using that credit card, but I remember that Frisbee. And I share with everyone, that is my $5,000 Frisbee story. And I think we all have these different stories, and they all stem for our lack of having these important financial conversations with our parents. And I know my parents did their best with their limited means, and they do love and care about me. And I also was a detriment in terms of not having the financial conversation. The child is not going to have to think about money. We're not going to have this money conversation. And eventually that affected my relationship. So I like to tell everyone I am the accidental money expert. But when I talk about money, I love talking about money as it relates to our mental, emotional, and spiritual well-being. That is the place that I focus on when I talk with others about the topic of financial wellness. And I did not properly introduce myself, but I wanted to share that story before I let you know that I am the founder of a financial wellness website, frugal.com, and author of 2 books, You Only Live Once, and the upcoming Happy Money, Happy Life. And as you can tell with this title, the focus for me is about joy and happiness, but not pushing down the challenges and the suffering, the pain that we all go through. So I think it's really vital and important for me to share that as I am unraveling the financial traumas that I grew up with as a child, I am discovering the financial traumas my parents grew up with and why they are the way they are. For me, I can complain about I did not have a car that my parents bought me as a teen. But then hearing the story of my dad not knowing if he was ever going to eat for an entire week, or how he was begging in the street for food. So those things I know has impacted his relationship with money, and why I share that he is messy with money. And so, but that has translated, that trauma has passed on to me, and he thought he was doing good by not having me worry. But again, that led to my own financial messiness. And so with that said, we all have these stories and we all have these challenges. And I always state with others that it's important for us to understand that our past does not define us, it's our actions that we take today, the knowledge that we learn, the network that we create and utilize in order to get to where we want to be. Thank you so much, Julian and Kirsten.
Wow. Thank you both, Jason and Cameron, for sharing those stories, and welcome everyone to the panel. My name is Kirsten. This is my husband, Julian. We are a married couple living in Atlanta, Georgia. And what we have in common with the other panelists is that we also grew up in homes where money was not discussed. For different reasons. Julian is the child of immigrants, and according to his mother, they didn't talk about money because there was no money to be talked about. And on my side, I am the daughter of parents who grew up in Jim Crow South. And while they did well in their lives, they went on to have long careers in corporate America. They grew up during a time where Black people weren't allowed access to different asset classes. And so they're largely self-taught. And so when it comes to discussing money, there is a comfort level, there's a literacy level, there's a cultural expectation, going back to what Andy said about politeness, or maybe it was Cameron that said about politeness of talking with your children about money. And so I grew up with watching them kind of live through their childhood trauma. They spent their childhoods focusing heavily on just the needs because that's all there was money for. And so as adults, when they started making their own money, they leaned into the wants. And so we had what I would call a magical childhood. We weren't especially rich, but we took vacations. We stayed in Holiday Inns. We got to eat Chinese food and order pizza once a week. And so I just assumed that whatever money they were earning at work would be, was enough. And so when I started working, and I fell for the credit card scam in college too, Jason, I think I got a t-shirt. Yeah. But yeah, as I started working, I did not have the proper knowledge to save or invest. And I ended up with a ton of credit card debt. And so when Julian and I started dating, we both brought this respective baggage from our childhood and from what we learned in our households to our relationship. And our first conversation about money was actually our first argument about money, which led to a breakup. We obviously got back together and we're much better now, but we are in the middle of learning as we go. We document our journey on our website, Rich and Regular. We also have a podcast called Rich and Regular, and we're authors of a book called Cashing Out: Win the Wealth by Walking Away. And so we're very much in the messy middle of learning about all of this. My parents, both of them, have been retired less than 5 years. They still very much live like they still work full time. And so we are trying to kind of slowly work through the necessary conversations of what aging and protecting what their lifetime of work has afforded them. And so that's my story. I'll turn it over to you.
Yeah. So as Kirsten mentioned, we met. It's a bit of a financial love story, if you will. If you've never heard of that, well, perhaps this is your first version of it. But we met in 2012. We met at work. And as she said, our very first conversation about money led to a breakup. But we got back together, not just because we knew that there was something there, but because we knew that there was a deeper purpose there as well. And we knew that what we represented as a couple, not just in our families, but in our communities, gave us an opportunity to have an impact, a positive impact on a lot of people, specifically as it relates to money. We realized very early, and we were honestly befuddled by it, that a lot of people were just very comfortable not talking about money, just continuing to ignore it. And what was a bit frustrating, but also still interesting to us, was that we felt like most of our most valuable lessons simply came from talking about money. A lot of people like to think that your financial education journey starts in moments like this, where you're an adult and you're jumping onto a web conference, or when you go to the bookstore or the library and you purchase a book. Well, the reality is most of our financial lessons actually start when we're very, very young. It comes from some of the experiences that Jason and Cameron shared that start to shape the way that we all think about money, what's possible, what we may be entitled to, what might be expected of us as providers, as partners in a relationship, and so on. And I think there were a couple of really big conversations that I felt a lot of us were missing out on, and just so happened to be creating a lot of turmoil in our 30s and 40s. And a lot of that had to do with caretaking, taking care of our adults or our parents. Obviously, Cameron shared her experience with that. And I think a lot of people have that similar struggle. We had that struggle. And even now, we are financially responsible for taking care of my mom. And so when I thought about all of the wisdom and all of the lessons that we were missing by simply practicing this comfortable avoidance of talking about money, is one of the reasons why we decided to start telling our own story and start participating in events like this, which is what gave birth to our podcast, our blog, and all of the other things. Our mission is to inspire better conversations about money, and I think this is just one of those. So thank you guys for having us, and we look forward to seeing where this conversation goes.
Thank you guys for sharing your story. It's clear that all of us have managed to learn from both our parents' mistakes and our own mistakes, which is a good thing. I mean, we should always be learning. But I really want to explore why money is such a taboo topic and why so many families are reluctant to discuss it. Now, Julian and Kirsten, I know that one of the most popular episodes of your Money on the Table YouTube series was the conversation you had with Julian's mom. I loved this episode, absolutely loved it. And there were a lot of comments that viewers left about how important it is to have family money conversations, but also how difficult these conversations can be. So I want to ask you why you think it's important for parents and their children to talk about money, why these conversations are so difficult, and how we can make them less awkward.
Sure. Thank you for that. What's interesting about that particular episode is that it is unquestionably one of the most popular episodes. but it's also one of the least shared. And what I mean by that, or what I find interesting about that, is whenever we meet readers or viewers or listeners in public, I would say at least 30 to 40% of them always talk about that particular episode and how they used it as we intended it, as a bridge to spark a conversation with their own parents about money. They want to be able to say, oh, see, this is the conversation that I want to have with you. And so we recorded that episode, as funny and uncomfortable, intense as it was. We got through it, and I learned a lot. My mother learned a lot, and it was one of those things that I think really left the mark on people. But one of the reasons why I think these types of conversations, despite how uncomfortable they can be, are so important, and especially for people like us, because we're just like millions of other Americans out there. We're part of this odd label called the sandwich generation. And it's basically this group of people who essentially feel financially strapped. For every dollar that they have to, a set of very difficult decisions they make. They've got to think about themselves. They have to think about how they financially support their children. To Jason's point, they may be college age and getting ready to go to college, or even if they're younger, you got to think about things like daycare or medical care and so on. But if that same dollar is also responsible in many cases for supporting your parents, and that's what makes making financial decisions, or sound financial decisions, so difficult for a lot of people. And so I think that's one of the really, really big reasons that unfortunately too many of us are ignoring. And so if you are a parent out there and you're at some point going to be relying on your children, you owe it to yourself. And I think you owe it to your children to have that conversation with them so that you can get a clearer understanding of what that looks like. In my case, I learned and confirmed what I suspected, which was that my mother expected me to do what she did for her mother. My mother moved from the island of Jamaica to New York City, and I want to say the 1960s or 1970s. And that's essentially just what you did. There was very little opportunity in Jamaica. And so most people define success by their ability to leave the island and go to the United States, where there were plenty of jobs and opportunities to earn. And like a lot of other immigrants, with every single paycheck, she would take some money and she would send it back to support her parents and to support all of the other people who weren't able to make that journey. I remember very clearly as a kid, as soon as we would walk into our New York apartment, there was a barrel there. And throughout the year, we would just go to the grocery store, and if there was a buy one, get one rice, or buy one, get one bars of soap, we'd keep one and put one in the barrel. And so essentially every time we would walk through our door, a part of the spoils that we'd collected from work was put into that barrel. And when that barrel got full, we put a cap on it and we would send it to Jamaica. And so this mindset was baked into my mother's way of life. And so now that her son is college educated and has done well, she was fully expecting me to do all of those things. And it's not to say that we weren't willing, but we had to discuss the details. To what extent were you expecting financial support? When did you expect that financial support to start? And did that conflict with some of the other things that we may have been dealing with, like having a child or wanting to enjoy the earlier years of our marriage before we have a child, and so on? So I think that's one of the primary reasons why so many people really, really need to have these conversations, because you've got to get into the details. I think the intent is there. The love and the sentiment is there for a lot of us, but the details and how those funds are distributed and to what extent it may be creating some types of challenges in other areas of our lives is really where the rubber meets the road.
Thanks, Julian. You know, as you mentioned, your mom was an immigrant, and I think it's much more, it's kind of common knowledge, I think, in other countries that kids are going to help support parents as they
Mhm.
get older. It's not such common practice in the United States. I see Kirsten's nodding her head, yes. And I know you even mentioned that in that YouTube um, episode, because I know, Kirsten, you mentioned that in America, we often think, well, our employer is going to help support us, with those retirement accounts and benefits. Um, but what's interesting, though, is that if you are American, 100% American, watching this, I could tell you there's a good chance that your parents are expecting you to play some sort of role in their finances and care as they age, even if they haven't told you. And the reason I can say this is because there have been surveys on this. In fact, Fidelity Investments did a survey and they found that an overwhelming majority of older adults expect their adult children to be involved with their care, be executor of their estate when they pass away, help them with their finances as they get older. Yet most of these children have no idea because the parents have never told them this. And that's really part of the reason why I wrote an entire book on the topic. And Jason, when I was working on that book, I talked to you. I reached out to you to ask about your experience talking to your parents about their finances. And at the time, you told me it was a conversation that you were afraid to have. And so I want to ask you, why were you afraid to have that conversation and how did you get past that fear?
Thank you so much for that question. I do want to piggyback a little bit on what Julian has shared, because in my household, and something about like a Hispanic and Filipino household, we do live in multi-generational homes. So we do have our parents or our kids and even our uncles and aunts living with us at times. And so that does create financial strains. And there is an unspoken rule, especially in immigrant households, that you are going to take care of your parents. And as they age and get older, that unspoken rule gets louder and louder. And so there are talks within immigrant communities about how we, their children, are the retirement plans. And that takes a lot of stress. I mean, that we take on a lot of stress. And I think that is part of why I was afraid to have the conversation. And being in the field of personal finance, having a degree in finance, and also working in the banking industry, I knew how to have these conversations. But trying to have these conversations with my parents was really tough because there is still that parent-child relationship, and they have taken care of me for the past 18 years. And then all of a sudden I'm stepping up and trying to say, okay, it's my time to help you in your next stage of life. But they still see me as a kid. They still see me as their child, even though I have all this experience. But with that said, they also expect me to be the financial helper when they're older. So there are these things that I had to wrestle with. And so you can imagine why I was scared to have this conversation, because I knew I needed them to max out their 401ks. I knew I needed them to think about long-term care. I knew I needed them to get out of the credit card mindset. But again, I knew and culturally that I did want to take care of them in some form or fashion. And so for me, I was afraid to have this. And when we had talked, when you were writing your book, why that fear, and that all had to deal with, again, culturally and just how my family operated. We didn't talk about money. But then when I saw that they were facing financial difficulties, when my mom was diagnosed with Parkinson's a few years ago, and she had to retire because she can no longer work, so she retired early, and she was the breadwinner at the home, it became more of an important conversation. But I can tell you, it was not easy whatsoever. And trying to, for me, I think I was trying to rescue them before they even realized they needed help. And that caused a lot of arguments, a lot of frustration. And I think also in a way reaffirmed why I was afraid to have this conversation. But now that I am a few years removed from that period, I am comfortable and actually more forceful in saying we need to kind of overcome that fear of having these conversations with them. And I can let you know too, during COVID, my mom had 2 episodes where we believed that she was having a stroke, and she was sent to the hospital twice in a period of a few months. And of course, going through the COVID protocols, et cetera. And then the nurse asking me, do you have the necessary documents in the event of death? And I mentioned to her, we tried having this conversation, and she informed my mom how important that was. And I said, I can only do so much. And unfortunately, I didn't have I don't want to say the courage, but like the knowledge or the wherewithal to be able to push in terms of, I need to know where all your documents are at. I need to make sure that we have the living will and all these different documents. And so that did help. And certainly we don't have to wait for these moments, these very scary moments of being in the hospital to have these conversations. But I think hearing it from someone else other than their son helped my mom wrestle with the idea that she needed help and that she needed to listen to me, her child, with regards to these financial documents for health and end of life. And so, yeah, my fear was grounded in truth, because when I say we had arguments, and eventually we were able to get through them. And I think someone had mentioned about like having these conversations of when you're retiring or seniors, and that certainly I was sharing information and stories and your book with my parents and also my brothers and sisters, because I'm not alone. I'm the fourth child. There's 5 of us. But being the single person, being the person who is financially free and can work anywhere, it defaulted to me, or I felt the pressure of being the caretaker. And so that has led to me being the official caretaker for my folks.
Thanks, Jason. I want to highlight something that you said that worked for you is having that third party involved. That is a great way to get through to reluctant parents who aren't willing to open up about their finances and have these conversations, is to reach out to a family doctor, perhaps a financial professional that your parent works with, other family members, your parents' siblings or family friends, and saying, hey, I really want to talk to my parents about their finances. I can't get through to them. Can you encourage them to share some information with me? Because, like you said, sometimes parents can be a lot more willing to listen to their peers or that unbiased professional than to their own kids. And I know people are asking about some other ways to have these conversations. I'm just going to throw out a few really quickly here. Um, an easy way to do it is to ask about what if scenarios. What if something were to happen to you and you ended up in the hospital and I needed to make sure your bills got paid? How can I do that? You could share a story about someone you know who had to get involved with their parents' finances, or someone who lost a parent and that parent didn't have a will, and all the conflict that created in the family, those people who were left behind. If you know your parents are really reluctant to discuss anything related to money, you could do what Julian and Kirsten did when they sat down with his mom and, just kind of asking, what was it like for you growing up? Start with, big picture topics, and then ease your way in by asking more and more questions. And these conversations take time. They don't, you're not going to sit down and grill your parents for hours on end about their finances. You introduce the idea of getting them to share a little information with you. And then over time, you have more and more conversations, and it can take time. And so you don't want to give up. You want to keep trying. As Jason said, sometimes you have to be a little bit forceful. And he said he had arguments, but guess what? They got past it. They're still talking. And that's a good thing. And if you let your parents know that you are looking out for their best interest, and that's why you want to gather information, then most likely they will realize that it's good to have these conversations, and they will open up. But you have to let them know that you're looking out for their best interests, and these conversations need to come from a place of love and respect. But I want to keep going, and I know there are a lot of questions, and so we're going to, hopefully have time to give people a chance to ask some of these, or we'll read these questions. But I want to ask some more questions to you guys. Jason, in particular, I know that you have a story about how a money decision led you to a deep regret, because I know we all have these complicated relationships with money, and sometimes these relationships can impact our relationships with family and friends. So Jason, if you can share your story about your grandmother, I think people are really going to benefit from hearing this.
Thank you so much. Yeah. So one of the key things that I like to share with people to be open in terms of my finances, I've been able to achieve financial security through learning and access and knowledge, and also being able to help and support my parents. But I am focused on the quality of the life that we live. So I'm all about health and wealth and the overall quality, and utilizing money as that tool. And so with that said, that's a preface to this story, because knowing that my mom has Parkinson's, knowing that the progression of that disease, I wanted to make sure that she continues to enjoy her life, that she has higher quality of life, and that she can see and do the things she want to do, especially being able to spend time with her family, who are in the Philippines. So we planned a trip to go visit my grandma, my Lola, in 2019. And so we had the conversation and she was excited. And we were planning to go in the holidays of 2019. So you're looking at Thanksgiving to Christmas. And so during that time, Christmas is a big deal in the Philippines. They start celebrating in September. And so it's a months long celebration of the holidays. And so we were going to go, and the flights to the Philippines were thousands of dollars because that's high peak demand. I had the financial means, but having the conversation with my mom and the type of relationship she has with money, she felt spending the couple of thousands to fly to the Philippines, $2,000 each per person, was too much, because she saw that the money that we could save could go to her family who necessarily don't make money in the Philippines. So there was that piece, that it was a waste of money to spend that much to fly. So I decided, against my own philosophy and core values, that we can save money and we can push it off a few months. We can surprise my grandma in April of 2020. We all know what happened in 2020. And so we weren't able to fly out to the Philippines to see my Lola. And a few months later, she passed away in July 14th on my birthday. So you can imagine the pain. And as I'm talking, I'm getting goosebumps because, and a little bit emotional, because of the fact that I had the financial means, I had the conversation with my folks, and here I was making a financial calculation and not a human connection. And because of that financial calculation, I didn't do what I felt was right. I didn't do what I thought that we should have done. And that led to never being able to hug my grandmother once again, or having my mother see her mother one last time. And so that does haunt me. And a reaffirmation on the importance of having these financial discussions. And also for me to understand that regardless of what financial stage of life we're in, that we really have to look at our core values and be able to funnel these decisions, not solely filtering them through finances. They are important, and that's the topic of this. But also that there are moments, and as we get closer and closer to our end of life, I think about this myself. I think about it for my parents, and with all the medical conditions that they have, I want to, and I force the conversation gently. And so with that experience of again, with my grandmother, I made a different decision. I forced my parents on a road trip across the US. And I know it's hard on their body, and they complained every single day. But I can tell you, a couple years later, all they could talk about are the memories they had on the road. And so for me, that was a way to kind of repay back this experience, to heal from that trauma.
I love that story, Jason. I just wanted to chime in and say I had a similar experience. My grandmother turned 90 early last year, and the flights last year, I don't know if you guys remember all the travel drama from last year, but the flights were very, very expensive to go to Houston. And I still made the decision to buy the tickets for the three of us. And I'm so glad that I did, because our son, who is 5, got to go to a 90th birthday party, which I don't think my parents did. And even for me, when I was in the room, there were women who were 96 and still moving, 94 and still, had their facilities. And I think it's important because one of the things that my parents missed out on, unfortunately, is they didn't have the luxury of seeing a lot of people grow old. In their time, a lot of their elders either died suddenly or worked up until the point of being so sick that they eventually passed away. They didn't see people in their golden years. And so this idea of preparing for that stage in life is somewhat foreign to them. And so I think there is a benefit in getting more exposure to seeing people and hearing stories and asking questions of people who are living longer and living longer after their working lives, to be able to help kind of guide these conversations at an age where they can still make a decision to ensure that they have some level of quality of life or care for themselves as they grow older.
I couldn't agree more. I wanna ask one last question, and I want to ask this to Julian and Kirsten. In your Money on the Table episode with Julian's mom, you talk with her about whether children have a responsibility to help their parents as they age. And Julian, as you mentioned, your mom said she expected you to help her as she got older because that was what was expected of her. And this conversation, this conversation you had with your mom, it really resonated with me because of my experience of caring for my mom. My mom never asked me to help when she was diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease. I just took it upon myself to help her because I loved her and I wanted to help. And I'm so grateful that I was able to provide that help. Was I the perfect caregiver? No, but I did the best I could, and really, it means so much to me that I was able to help care for her. But Julian, you pointed out in that episode that there is this belief among some financial gurus that parents are on their own and that children have their own lives to take care of. And as I mentioned earlier, Kirsten, you had said that in America, there's this idea that employers are supposed to be taking care of us with benefits and retirement plans. But I also know that the two of you don't fall into that line of thought because you're helping support Julian's mom. And Jason, I know that you're helping care for your parents. But money can often be at the root of these decisions to get involved with our parents' cares. There might be resentment that parents didn't manage their finances well and didn't take the necessary steps to pay for their own care. There might be your own financial insecurity that prevents you from being able to support parents. And there's also this avoidance of family money conversations, financial planning, and a willingness to address issues around aging and death. So I'd love to hear from all of you what you think about the role that adult children should or not play in their parents' finances and their care, and how we can better plan for the possibility of having to step into that role. How do we prepare our own finances to be there for our parents if they need us and to pass on a legacy to our own children or loved ones?
Sure, I will take a stab at this, but I will preface it by saying this is part of what makes family finance such a complicated and difficult topic, right? There is no right answer. It's an incredibly complex and personal decision. I will say that from our experience, we do disagree with a lot of the mainstream advice, which basically says everyone is on their own. I mean, to Jason's point, and even to Kirsten's point, I have my own set of trauma that I'm still dealing with because I put money prior or ahead of creating a memory or sort of honoring the legacy of my own grandmother. And that was back when I was in college. And so here I am now as an adult, where we had this very difficult decision to make as we could see the little bit of money that my mother had saved and being reliant on that money earlier than she needed to because she was sort of forced out of the workforce. You've got all of these factors sort of playing in at once, right? You have our understanding of the opportunity cost related to money that isn't invested, that we know could grow, and then we can use it in the future. You've got the realization of a child who has very present and immediate needs. Some of them are also wants, but let's just face it, that's the realities of parenting. And so all of these things sort of playing together, which is what makes it very difficult, I think, to come to a decision that ultimately you feel comfortable with. What I will say is at least one of the keys is reaching a point where you open up a completely different set of potential solutions that you may not have thought were relevant to you. And so if you think about someone who may be in a particular job and they may accept the fact that they don't earn as much money as they know, let's say their peers or their siblings or someone else makes, but they're fine with that because they really love what they do. The question I think you need to ask yourself is, well, what happens, right? Going back to your point around what ifs, what happens if you are now financially responsible for supporting your parent? Where do you prioritize or put that love and appreciation for the comfort of that job relative to these very real and immediate needs, right? This may require you to develop a completely different set of tools. It may require you to overcome a fear or a hesitance to using or embracing new technologies, or it may force you to confront the very real issue of downsizing earlier than you may have thought of, or upsizing to allow your parent to move into your home because that's the right decision. And so all of these things I think are kind of at play, but I think the first thing is continuing to learn, continuing to be open to learn so that you are you have a wider set of options and tools available to you to deal with these issues when they occur, not if, but when they occur. Again, that was our dilemma, if you will. We know that's the dilemma that many of the people in our generation, but certainly people in the older generation are dealing with as well. And so there's only so much you can save. I think many of us owe it to ourselves to continue to find newer, more lucrative ways of earning money so that we have more resources to deal with any of the issues that life throws at us.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's about an openness to different solutions than the ones that you may have seen for yourself or seen other people do. I think philosophically speaking, America is still a relatively young country. We are now trying to figure out culturally what we do with our elders, what we do when people live longer than we expected them to before, again, because we didn't have the technology, didn't have the medical facilities, like people were dying fairly young. And now we have this gap between employment and passing that we as a country haven't come up with a solution for. And so I think part of it is just recognizing that and learning from other cultures and countries and families who take very different approaches to solve for the gap, but then also demanding our leaders to do something about this, to figure it out, because it's going to affect all of us in some way or another. And so to continue to kind of put together individual solutions, that's one way, but we also need to push for the larger solution because we are all going to hopefully, Lord willing, grow old and need the same support.
Yeah, I'd like to piggyback on that. I think there's a lot of things that we can do in our own personal lives to make sure that we are set in terms of our finances and covered. So this way we do have the resources and the time and the opportunity to help our parents, and that doesn't create undue stress on ourselves. And to Kirsten's point, it's also looking at the larger systemic places that we can work on, some of the benefits and resources that are both local, state, and federal, and figuring out how those resources can help aging individuals, our parents included, and having that conversation. And also, I'm a big fan, Julian, of multiplication and diversification of income. And we need more conversations around that. And I know there was a question here from a student who's having a hard time getting a job. And so one of the key things for me, what I learned in this process of going through having these conversations, was that when we are individuals and we want to have self-autonomy, and the fact that I'm taking on the role or stepping into the role that my parents have played, that's what led up to the arguments and disagreements. And I had to, as the caregiver, as the person that loves them, understand when I am aging, when I am in my senior years, I want to still have self autonomy. I still want to feel independent. And I made the mistake of thinking I can handle everything. Don't worry about it. And realizing to honor them and to honor the sacrifice and the work that they've gone through, I need to figure out how can I help them achieve their life goals, even though they are in their late 70s. It is still possible. And just guiding them, ensuring that I can be a resources and a tool. So my approach had to be different. And that to me was an important lesson. And I hope others as well. And if you're having conversations with your kids and you want to have this tough conversations about end of life and medical issues and the financial aspect of it, let them know that you want to still feel like you can take care of yourself, that you're someone that needs assistance, but you also want to be able to basically as an adult pick and choose, and that they can lean into you when they have issues. I think that is vital and that is important. So I wanted to share that.
I'm glad you pointed that out, because that being able to have that financial independence as you age, it does come down though to planning and to having these conversations. Like you said, you can't go it alone. It is so important, whether you're listening as an older adult or you want to have these conversations with aging parents, is to talk and to make sure that you have essential estate planning documents. And an estate plan is not something that just wealthy people do. All adults need certain legal documents to spell out their wishes. If you care who gets your things when you are no longer here, even if you don't have a lot of stuff, you need a will that spells out who gets what when you die, or you need a trust. If you don't have a will, state law will determine who gets your assets. Family can end up in court fighting over who gets what. It is the greatest gift that you can leave your loved ones, is to have a will. Even more important, I think, than a will is to have a financial power of attorney document. This lets you name someone you trust to make financial decisions for you if you can't. You might know your parents' bank passwords, but that doesn't mean that you can sign checks for them if they develop dementia and they haven't named you power of attorney. You have to be named your parents' power of attorney to make financial transactions and decisions for you. If this document has not been signed while they are still mentally competent, they can no longer sign it once they are deemed incompetent, and you have to go to court to petition to become their conservator. This is time consuming, very expensive, and emotionally draining. You also need to make sure there is a healthcare power of attorney, someone to make medical decisions for you. If you can't, there needs to be an advance directive or living will spelling out what sort of end of life medical care you do or do not want. These documents need to be in place. There need to be discussions about long-term care. If you need long-term care, where do you want to receive that care? Do you have a way to pay for it? And surprise, Medicare doesn't pay for long-term care. It does not. Okay. It doesn't. It just doesn't. And you need to talk to your children about whether you expect them to play a role. Children, you need to talk to your parents about whether there's any expectation that you will provide care. These conversations need to happen before there is any sort of healthcare emergency. The more planning you do and the sooner you start planning, the more options are available. Okay. That's my soapbox. This is like all I focus on this all the time, is why you have these conversations and what you want to find out. We had some questions I was trying to read through, and there were a lot of questions that people ask about what if you are an older adult and you don't have children? What do you do in those situations? I'll let you guys weigh in. I'm just going to point out, you need to have that social safety net. You still need to have that power of attorney document. You still need to have someone you trust who will be able to step in and manage your finances for you if you're unable to. And there are professionals out there who can do that for you. You can set up a trust, a living trust, and you can hire an independent trust management company to manage your finances for you. But I'm sure Julian and Kirsten and Jason, you might have some ideas for people who don't have family they can count on to help them.
Yeah, so I'd like to chime in. So one of the key things too, as well, is that if you don't have family, one aspect is also there are things that you do care about, whether there are charities, there are church groups, organizations, and if you do have a nest egg, and we're not talking, doesn't have to be a sizable nest egg, you want to make sure that they go to those organizations that you care about. So that is a way for you to keep your legacy alive. One other aspect as well, and it's something that I learned going on cruises and meeting with a lot of the 70 and 80-year-olds who are still out there exploring, and they all have different types of medical conditions. They say there's always time, and for them, there's never enough time to spend the money that they've accumulated, but they're said, God willing, they're going to spend it all because if everyone else in their life has been taken care of. And so if you're in that situation where you don't have kids, you don't have your parents or siblings, really look at your financial situation and create the plan that allows you, that higher quality of life that you've deserved, that you've worked for. And again, that's specific to those who have the specific financial means. And there are other aspects as well in terms of if you're facing financial difficulties and don't have the family to lean on. And that is a topic that we can really, really discuss. One last thing, and I'll push it off to Julian and Kristen. I think one of the most loving thing that we can do to those we love is to tell them what we want when we are medically incapacitated and when we are at end of life, because it will remove the unnecessary discussions, the drama, the arguments, and it's one way for you to say, okay, this is something I'm doing, and as a gift to children. I have a friend who is end of life nurse, and he told me the most alarming thing that he's learned is the arguments that take place at the hospice places between people who love the same individual, but they can't agree. And so that is one of my final words.
I have a couple of things that I would add, but I have to say you just hit on a particular word and Kirsten would tell you I've been a bit obsessed over the last 3 or 4 days because I've discovered the wonderful world of cruising. And so I've been going deep as I'm planning my first cruise. And so to the person who asked that question, I think you owe it to yourself to have some fun as well.
Yeah.
But even before that, if we're not talking about blood relatives, surely there was a friend or someone that would be thrilled to be gifted something or to have a problem solved. But let's say, that aside, or let's say cruising or something too much, we're a big fan of solving what we like to call $1,000 problems. And these are the smaller problems in your local neighborhood where, no, it's not going to save an entire community of people, on the other side of the world, but there are problems. We're literally surrounded by them. Over the last couple of years, we've spent quite a bit of time participating in our son's PTA and volunteering at his school. And one of the things that we discovered is that there is an ongoing balance of school lunches at our son's school, meaning there are kids who are given lunch, they have lunch, but they're just being given a lunch because they actually didn't have enough funds. They had insufficient funds to pay for it in the first place. And so one of the things that you can do if you like that school or you have a school that's nearby is to call them up and say, hey, what's the balance on the unpaid lunches in your school? And you can make that problem go away for something like $500, right? That saves and creates a burden or relieves a burden for so many people. I'll give you another one. One of the things that was particularly important for us as a part of our book tour, we had this idea of traveling around the country to meet with readers, obviously, but we really wanted to do our part to leave every single one of those cities in a little better condition than we found them. And so we really tapped into something as simple as food insecurity. We are all being faced with the realities of inflation right now. And we know that food is very, very expensive. And as a result, people who don't have the means don't really know how they're going to have the money to get that next meal. And so when you start talking about where $100 could go or where $500 could go to help a local nonprofit organization or a food pantry or something like that. I mean, it would, you have no idea, and I'm sure some of you do, that that money can go a really, really long way. And so to Jason's point, charitable giving, and whether it's, you know, to an organization, whether it's to a friend or the local school or whatever it is, I think it's one of the most wonderful things that you can do. And you'll certainly be remembered and feel great when you're done.
Thank you guys for those wonderful suggestions. Annie, it looks like we're running out of time. I don't know if we have time for more question or you need to wrap
I think
up.
we do have time for at least one more question.
Okay. I'm trying to scroll through, you know, and I see some people commenting about parents who are counting on them for support, inability to pay for long-term care. You know, as I mentioned, Medicare does not pay for long-term care, but Medicaid does for those who meet the financial requirements. You do have to have limited income and assets to qualify for Medicaid. It will pay for nursing home care in every state. In many states, it will also pay for at-home care. And that money can also go toward paying a family caregiver. So if you have put your life on hold to care for an aging parent or a loved one, and your parent has limited income and assets, they might qualify for Medicaid, and you might be able to get Medicaid to pay you as a family caregiver. Veterans, there are veterans benefits that can help pay for long-term care. There are some resources out there. Elder law attorneys can help. I know that costs money, but in the long run, it can save money. There are financial advisors out there who will do pro bono work and who can help, you know, look at your parents' assets and figure out how to make the most of those assets to stretch them. There are resources. You can always reach out to me and I can share some more information. But I don't know if Julian or Jason, if you guys want to comment at all about, you know, people who are finding themselves in a position where they are their parents' retirement plan and their parents have told them as much, or they're wondering, you know, how to provide support for parents who are struggling financially.
I think I recommend this book to everyone, but there's a book called Set Boundaries, Find Peace by Nedra Tawwab. It's not specifically about the parent-child relationship and aging and care itself, but it is about boundaries, which is a really important tool in the toolbox when it comes to this task, this expectation. And so I would recommend really getting firm on what boundaries are, kind of open your mind to revisiting how you define that and how you express it in your life, because it's going to be a tool that you're going to use over and over again, and establishing to what extent, to Julian's words, to what extent you support and how far you extend yourself to make sure that you're not burning yourself out or sacrificing yourself in this time is a really important step to take. So that would be my advice.
I would
And I
echo
think
that.
that's excellent advice.
Yeah, I would echo that as well. And I think it's important for those who have children, when you're setting boundaries for the help that you're providing your parents, it's also showing your child the importance of boundaries. And this way too, you are not passing financial or generational financial trauma onto your kids and things that you hope to change, and not necessarily realizing that if you don't set the boundaries, your kids are not going to learn the boundaries that are necessary to deal with you. And I think that is so vital.
I just want to step in, and I know we have to wrap up now, but I want to take a moment just to thank all of you here, both our esteemed speakers, Cameron, Kirsten, Julian, and Jason, and everyone also in the chat who've really opened up their hearts to us, sharing these difficult experiences with money. I wish we had more time, but I will send out a follow-up email to everyone with information for all of our speakers, and I'm sure you can reach out to them. We can provide their websites, their contact information. If you feel like some of your questions weren't addressed here, And I encourage you all to keep coming to these events on Wednesdays this month. Next week, we have our table talk and our workshop. I pasted the link in the chat. So we'll end here. I wish you all a wonderful day and a wonderful week. And thank you for being on this money journey with us. Once again, Cameron, Kirsten, and Jason, and Julian, thank you so much. And I hope to see all of you soon.